intoxicating dream of glory. As thousands of French knights thundered across the plain, the ground literally trembling beneath the hooves of their destriers, they collided with the Ottoman vanguard, the Akinji, with the force of a tidal wave hitting a sand castle. The Akinji were light irregulars, unarmored and armed mostly with bows and swords. They stood no chance against the kinetic energy of heavy European cavalry. French lances shattered shields and pierced bodies, trampling the Ottoman skirmishers into dust, to the knights inside their helmets. This was validation. They were screaming and laughing as they cut down the enemy. In their minds, Sigismund had been a fool. The Turks were weak. The battle was already half won. But they didn't realize that in Bayezid's army, the Akinji were treated as human ammunition, expendable assets designed to absorb the initial shock and pull the French deeper into the valley, further from Hungarian support, and straight toward the hill where the real defense was waiting. As smoke and dust cleared, the French knights saw their next target elite Janissaries positioned on the slope. With a roar, the knights spurred their horses forward, expecting to ride them down just as easily. But then the horses stopped. Screams of agony from the animals filled the air. The front line of the French charge had slammed into a wall of wood, hidden in tall grass and dust, where thousands of sharpened stakes driven deep into the ground at an angle, pointing straight at the chests of horses. This was the chevaux de frise, a simple but devastating defense. A horse, no matter how well trained, will not charge into a solid wall of spikes. The momentum of the greatest cavalry in Europe died in an instant. The charge turned into a traffic jam. Now the trap began to close. From behind the stakes, Janissary archers opened fire. Not undisciplined volleys, but a storm. The Ottoman composite bow was capable of punching through mail and finding weak points in plate armor. But the real targets were the horses. French knights, trapped in the crush, watched as their mounts were turned into pincushions. This was the moment of decision. A disciplined commander might have pulled back, regrouped, and waited for infantry to clear the stakes. But the French were drunk on adrenaline and rage. They were the Golden Army. They did not retreat. Instead, they did something that sealed their fate. They dismounted. Picture the scene. Thousands of men encased in 60 to 80 pounds of steel plate and chainmail, sliding off their dying horses into the mud. They drew their swords and axes and began to hack at the wooden stakes, screaming at the archers above them. They were no longer cavalry. They were now the world's heaviest, slowest, and most exhausted infantry. They managed to chop through the stakes. They pushed forward, driven by manic fury. Even on foot, even exhausted. They were dangerous warriors, tanks wading into the Janissaries, their long swords cleaving through leather and flesh. The French actually began to push the Janissaries back. They were winning the brawl, but losing the war. Why? Because of the heat. It was late September in Bulgaria. The sun was beating down. Inside a suit of plate armor, the temperature can rise to over 120 degrees Fahrenheit during exertion. The knights were essentially cooking themselves alive, gasping for air, sweat blinding their eyes, their muscles burning with lactic acid. They weren't fighting an army anymore, they were fighting biology. Finally, after an agonizing, lung-bursting climb, they reached the top of the plateau. The Janissaries scattered and retreated. The French knights, chests heaving, blood soaking their velvet surcoats, looked around. They had done it. They had broken the skirmishers, broken the stakes, broken the elite infantry. Jean de Nevers, likely leaning on his sword for support, must have felt a surge of triumph. They had proven Sigismund wrong. Then the ground began to shake again, not from their own horses this time, but from the other side of the ridge. From the hidden reverse slope of the hill, a sound emerged, the deep rhythmic thrumming of 40,000 hooves. The French knights looked up, wiping sweat from their eyes, and their blood ran cold. Bayezid hadn't played his hand yet. He had been waiting, and now, rising over the crest of the hill like a silver tide, came the Sipahis, the Ottoman heavy cavalry reserve. Fresh, mounted, fast, and numbering in the tens of thousands. The French were on foot, exhausted, isolated, and alone. The hunt was over. The slaughter was about to begin. The collision between the fresh, mounted Ottoman Sipahis and the exhausted, dismounted French knights was not a battle. It was a physics experiment gone wrong. Imagine trying to stop a speeding truck with your bare hands while wearing a sauna suit. The Sipahis swept around the flanks, their scimitars flashing in the sun. The French, too tired to lift their heavy shields, were huddled together in desperate knots of steel. The famous Furia Francesca, the French Fury, evaporated. Panic set in. These men who had spent their lives training for individual duels were now being herded like cattle. The Ottomans didn't even have to kill all of them, they just had to knock them over. Once a knight in full plate armor is pushed into the mud, exhausted and dehydrated, he's effectively a turtle on its back. He isn't getting up. At the center of this chaos was Jean de Nevers. Minutes ago, he thought he was winning. Now he was watching his friends die. His bodyguards fought desperately to keep the Turks away, but the sheer weight of numbers was overwhelming. The Ottomans realized that these men in gilded armor were worth more alive than dead. The order went out: capture the rich ones. The slaughter shifted into a violent kidnapping operation. Knights were dragged down, pummeled into submission, stripped of their weapons. Jean de Nevers was tackled and bound. The Golden Army had surrendered. We return to the red morning of September 26th. Sultan Bayezid sits on his folding chair overlooking the river. He is bruised, angry, grieving the loss of thousands of his own soldiers. He has decided that the rules of chivalry do not apply here. The surviving crusaders, roughly 3,000 of them, are herded before him, stripped to their undergarments or completely naked, shivering. But not all are treated equally. Bayezid needs money to pay for his campaign. He orders someone to identify the ransomable nobility, the Count of Nevers, Marshal Boucicaut, and a handful of other high-ranking nobles are pulled aside and forced to watch. Then the signal is given. The rest of the prisoners are brought forward in groups, tied together by ropes around their necks. There is no trial, no last rites, only the rhythmic swing of the sword. Ottoman executioners work with grim industrial efficiency, severing heads until their arms cramp, then swapping with fresh executioners. The slaughter continued from early morning until late afternoon. Approximately 3,000 men were executed in retaliation for Rahova. The Battle of Nicopolis was over. The age of chivalry had been executed. Subscribe to Great History for more battles where arrogance and tactical incompetence led to catastrophic defeat.